Okay, let's get started. I'm Jim Koshar with Hudson River Computing. This webinar is for part of our 7 criteria of businesses, what they should look for when they're selecting an ERP product. So we're kind of in the process of that. So this is the second of a series of 7. So we're going to talk a little bit about who we are, what are the 7 criteria that we see, and then we're going to talk a little bit about functionality. And we're not going to talk about the actual functionality of the product itself, but we're going to talk about how to kind of search out what the functionality you might need is, and how to determine a little bit about if the system you're looking at or the systems you're looking at can actually kind of handle that. And that's kind of the goal for today. So let's get started. And so Hudson River Computing has been working with accounting software and ERP software since 1993. And so we've been doing around, we've done over 400 implementations of software. And so we've kind of gotten to know a little bit about those kind of pieces. Our staff consists of people that have worked in the ERP world for quite a while. All of them have prior experience, quote unquote, in the real world, meaning that we've all worked as controllers and various accounting positions throughout, as well as IT positions for programming for some of our programmers and integration specialists. So one of the nice things about it, we're careful about what products we pick, and because we're the people that will be sitting across the table from you if something doesn't work appropriately that we go through. So it's kind of a combination. So as part of this series, we're going to kind of cover what you should look for in a software product, as well as why we pick a particular software product a certain way. So that's kind of the theory behind it and how it goes. So now if we go a little bit further, we're large enough to service, because we're not one guy working in a basement kind of thing, but we're a group of people that basically have those capabilities, but you're still small enough where you can still access the people you need to get the right service. So if we go on to the next one, we actually carry 2 products at this point. One is Acumatica and one is Microsoft Dynamics GP. Now today, with what we're covering, we're not going to actually cover either product in any kind of depth. You may see a slide from one or the other as we go through and do the presentation, though, because we're trying to come back to, how do you pick a product, not which product to pick at this point. So that's kind of the theory behind what we're working with. So in the first round, and it's available for the recording if you want to watch it, basically we talked about the technology. Why is it important for part of that criteria? And basically there's a lot of pieces that make it critical and important. Today we're focusing on functionality. And basically, how do you choose a product to make sure you have the functionality you need for your end result? And there's kind of different ways to do it, et cetera. And we're going to talk in depth today about it. The other 7 that we see that are critical are integration capabilities, and we'll talk about that a little bit today, but not in a whole lot of depth like we will next week. Reliability, is the system going to be, there in the future, and is going to be, does it crash every day or does it work every day? Vendor support. Not only from us, but what kind of support does the vendor offer directly to both you and us? It becomes important to make sure that you have a company that works well with you. So those become important. There's different pieces of it. How customizable is the product? Customizability, and basically in summary, can it be customized and upgradable? Okay, well, one sentence. And then last but not least, what's the value of the product? And again, we're going to be talking about all those in future weeks. So today we're going to concentrate on functionality. So let's talk about the functionality timeline. We did this with technology in the last round, and it's kind of the same but similar thought processes. From the 1980s, I'm not going to go back to the mainframes of the 60s and 70s, but basically it's kind of the same in the 80s still, in the beginning of the 80s in particular. So you figure the first PCs came out in the early 80s. They weren't really used for accounting software initially. It's more or less spreadsheets and word processing, some database work, but it took a little while for it to come in. But between 1980 and 88 or so, you ended up with minis and mainframes primarily still for accounting and ERP software. So at that point in time, it was programmed specifically for the user. So you said you needed something, and some programmer or programmers coded it for you to your requirements. All right, so functionality-wise, theoretically, it could match exactly what you were looking for. All right, it was time consuming though, it was complicated, and last but not least, it was expensive. That's why it was typically done more or less in larger companies. You didn't have small companies with 50 people or 100 people really doing that because of the expenditure of it, okay, between the mainframe itself and the coding capability. But again, the functionality usually worked pretty well because it was programmed exactly for that individual user. Keep in mind, nobody expected the functionality we have today. From 88 to 95 is when PC-based text-based systems finally came out, okay? And that dropped the price quite a bit. The functionality was much more basic. You know, there was much less customizable capabilities within the products back then. And not only that, people were willing to do it. It was their first round of doing something. You know, it was the first time they had actually automated and done any accounting functionality and or maybe some inventory a little bit here and there, but for the most part, it really kind of concentrated initially more on the accounting aspect of it. So the software tended to be much more generic because it wasn't customizable very easily. And, you know, it was the first round for everybody. So, you know, people went from doing paper-based accounting to computer-based. So it was the first time for small and mid-sized businesses. All right, so that's kind of where we came to. From 95 to 2013, we came out with the graphical-based systems, and they were primarily Windows-based. And there were a few Mac pieces out there, but primarily they were Windows-based. They were much easier to use than the text ones. You didn't have to remember how the menus worked and all those kind of things. You could actually click on an icon or a menu item. It was pretty straight to go through. We spent a lot of time educating people how to use a mouse in Windows. I mean, it sounds kind of weird today because everybody takes it for granted, but not everybody knew that initially. So the systems were much easier to use, took a little bit of a transitionary for the graphical environment in the early part of it. And then there was much more functionality. And then as at 1995, early on in that piece, the functionality was still more basic than it was toward the end of that series. So in the beginning, you might have had ARAP, accounts receivable, accounts payable, some inventory, some payroll, but it didn't really get too much into manufacturing and things like that for a little bit, okay? Toward the end of that, toward the 2013 or, you know, probably toward the early 2000s where you take 2002, 2003, they were kind of filled out with their functionality and they really had things like manufacturing software, kind of full distribution, those types of things, and it can handle larger organizations than they did at the beginning of that period. So the performance improved, the capabilities improved, and it was graphical, very functional. Now we've entered into the cloud-based graphical piece, okay? And you have you have the same requirements in the sense that more people have used the software or using software within the organizations. They're expecting a certain amount of base functionality. For example, if you're a manufacturer or you're a distributor or you're a nonprofit, you have a certain base level of functionality that you're using now in your current graphical product. So those cloud-based products have to have a lot of that already. So the functionality becomes very important of what the core functionality available from the vendors are. Secondarily, the new functionality for these products have gone beyond strictly accounting and maybe ERP. They've gone more into, hey, let's have a CRM module that goes along with our functionality and ties directly into our AR and sales order processing and inventory, et cetera. Expense reporting and all those kind of things, most of the time are built in directly into these products now. So there's times where, you can use a third-party product because maybe it has a certain specific functionality you're looking for. But again, these products have a full functional piece to them because people expect it and require it. And then last but not least, in the graphical piece, excluding all the technology we talked about last week, the advantages of being in the cloud is that the integrations are much easier than they used to be. So if you do have an industry requirement or you have an outside system that you require, maybe your customers send you orders a certain way through EDI or something like that, the bottom line is you have the ability to do that integration to get best of breed of what you might need, okay, or to accommodate a customer or a vendor. So you have a much easier integration process. So as we go through, I'm going to go through the functionality timeline. We're done with that. We're going to go to requirements. So how do we determine the true requirements of what we need to resolve for our problems as a base unit? So we're already using something usually, and we may or may not be happy with it, but we might have been using it for a number of years. Change is hard. So the key to it is we need to determine to make sure that the functionality in the new system matches what we require. Okay, and there's two parts to require. You have the desired end result. Here we need this absolutely positively. Could be regulatory, it could be because we've been doing it for 20 years and we have to have that because, hey, it makes us run efficiently. It could be a bunch of different things. Then we have, hey, the nice add-ons for going to the cloud, to the new systems that we don't have now, okay? So how do we determine both of those pieces? So for the desired end result, kind of a minimum, you have to go back and say, okay, how do we get there? So the key to that is you have to determine what your goal is. So in the case of a financial statement reporting, for example, how do you want to break down your organization departmentally or by product, et cetera, when you do your financial report writing for management making decisions and things. So the key to that is you actually kind of start from the back end, meaning here's the report I want to get to, and then you kind of back into what you need to get to that report. And some of that's going to be different things. Some of it is, hey, for a financial statement, how do we design our chart of accounts to make sure that we get to that end result easily? Then on top of that, then you have to throw on, okay, what are the reporting tools for the financial statement reporting that helps me get there? And then that combination is what's going to get you to that desired result. So it becomes important to look at the result you're trying to get to and then come back to that. You can take that for each area. For example, if I need to get an invoice out to a customer for certain types of products and send out a shipment, et cetera, we need to make sure here are the end results. The result is a shipment and ultimately the invoice that somebody can make sense of and pay. Okay, or maybe it's paying by credit card up front. And then, we don't process it until the credit card, goes through, and we do a book and chart, book and ship, where basically we book it to hold their credit card, and then we ship it, and then we charge the credit card. Those types of things. If those are our requirements, we need to make sure the system has a way to handle those pieces for us. Okay. So the question's simple. Can the system, produce a desired result? If it's key to your business, as you go through the sales process, don't assume that the software is going to work the way you think it should work and get you there. So the idea of it is make sure you see that it can do what you need it to do. Okay, it's important not to kind of flash over the important parts of your business. There are some pieces that you don't know what the future is going to hold, but the idea is if you have certain key day-to-days, you need to see how it's going to work and understand it a little bit. You don't need to be fully trained so you can operate it yourself, but the idea is you have to see it kind of go through the process so you're comfortable with it. The other part is there flexibility in the desired result? Because you've done something for 20 years doesn't mean it should be done the same way. Okay, so does it get to the desired result, but does it do it a different way, or should that be the result? So for example, the chart of accounts, will come back to that financial reporting statement again. Maybe when the business first started using the software you're currently using, the reporting capability was perfect and you got exactly the reporting you wanted at that point in time. But over years, perhaps what's happened is the requirements have changed. So it's become a scenario where what you thought you had, okay, and what you need now are two different things. Maybe you picked up, some pieces in a different industry. Maybe the organization changed because a part of your industry shut down and you've picked up a different industry on top of that. Maybe you just want more detail. The first time through, maybe you were okay with more summary information, but now maybe you want more detail in some ways. So the idea of it is there flexibility in a desired result? How much detail, how much summary, et cetera. If it's a gotta have, the answer is you gotta make sure the software does it exactly that way. If it's a scenario where it gets to the result and you have some flexibility in how you get there and exactly what the result is, that's fine too. But the key to it is making sure it's still acceptable. And then last but not least, I recommend developing a spreadsheet, okay, of what the desired results are. It doesn't have to be all inclusive, like, oh, I can print checks and I can do ACH payments and I can enter a voucher. You want to get the key pieces on here. And almost all the systems can create and print checks and do ACH files and things like that. The key to it is how they do it a little bit. Okay, but in general terms, is it more efficient and those kind of things? In general terms, in the system, you'll be able to see that. But the key to that is, are you getting the desired result for the critical items that you have for your organization? Okay, oops. All right, so if we go a little bit further, is it a nice to have, okay, or is it critical? Now, there's times where here's what we need, and gee, that's a nice add-on. You can see something where 3 different products do the same thing and it works for you primarily, but then you have this one type of scenario where it's important, okay? And you didn't think that, hey, I didn't even think about being able to do that, but maybe it's something that's not only nice to have, but maybe you want to add it to your criteria once you see what's out there. Keep in mind, no software will probably work 100% out of the box without some sort of tailoring. And that includes, hey, it could be as simple as we need to change the format on the invoice to look slightly differently. Maybe we want to change the color because our corporate color is, gold, and the default forms come out with blue on them. those kind of things. It could be that kind of simple things. It could also be slightly more important than that. But the key to it is you have to meet a certain base level. And the key to that is then once you go to that base level and beyond, what are the tools and how is it, what do you need to do to actually do the tailoring of the system? How easy is it to do, and how easily can it be maintained? And that becomes, those pieces. And then last but not least, thinking about future requirements. Here's what we're doing today, but do we have the flexibility of what we might need to do tomorrow? And do they have functionality areas that are available from the product already that might help us expand? For example, right now you might not be interested in doing inventory, but do they have inventory available? Or maybe you already have inventory and you have one location, but you think, hey, we might add another warehouse or another location at some point. If that's the case, we might need to track our materials by multiple warehouses. Can the system handle that out of the box? Those are some of the things you have to kind of think about for the organization. Part of the reason you need to take into account those future requirements is that over time, these systems are typically in use over 13 years. And if you think about what you were doing 13 years ago today, that's a big difference. Okay, you take a look at the safety features we take for granted in our cars today. That becomes part of that future requirement. Okay. What to expect? Okay, I'm using an Acumatica slide. Don't lock it into Acumatica in your mind, but the idea of it is I'm using that. And part of the reason is, they have pieces that they're part of their core product. The overall functionality is kind of important to know. You might not think you need project, but maybe you decide, we're going to build a new building, and we decide we want to track that cost effectively. Or maybe you decide that, hey, we're going to start breaking down some of our internal projects and start tracking the cost. Sometimes project might work well for that versus trying to do through the general ledger or some other reporting method. I'm not saying that you need it. I'm saying it's an option. The key to it is making sure you have that option. So if you take a look at the core products for Acumatica, you'll see they have a financial management series. In that case, it's ARP, GL, bank recs, taxes, those types of things. Then they have project accounting, just what I just talked about. Inventory management, they have customer management, they now have payroll. So the idea is, what to expect for core products. Those should all be reviewed. It doesn't mean you have to have them all, but it also depends on your business. If you think you might do inventory in the future, the answer is you should make sure the system has inventory. Okay, and pretty straightforward. To give you an idea of the future proof of that, it's not only worrying about it for what you have today, but where you're going. Now, in the last call, we actually talked about the cloud platform. We talked about the pieces and the plugins down here. Today, I'm going to talk about this piece up here for Acumatica, where you have the cloud ERP. You notice they have a whole bunch of different pieces. So they have kind of the general business editions, which basically, depending on your size of your business, most people in the small to medium market for accounting software / ERP market fall in the advanced area. Okay, so this is kind of the level of production or level of transactions. Then you notice here are the things you have kind of within that. So if you notice here, we have financials and inventory control and order management, and which includes AR, the sales side as well as the vendor side. You have customer relationship management, CRM, you have project accounting, and then you have time and expenses, okay? If you go over here to industry editions, they have a further breakdown, okay? Beyond inventory, suppose you need warehouse management where you want to barcode things and take inventory, et cetera. That's what the warehouse management comes in. Again, it's right from the vendor. So the idea of it is looking for these depths of the pieces of the product to make sure you have what you need over time. Okay, so that's what it really kind of comes down to, is trying to figure that out and making sure you kind of cover that. When you see a product that has a breadth of product, it means that there's a higher likelihood that they're going to match your requirement in the sense that for the future of what you might need from the product. Okay, so that's kind of the thing here. It's not necessarily you have to pay attention to the individual pieces, but you need to make sure it's there. Okay, so for general functionality, what do we need to look at? So when we step back and we look at it, what do we need? We need it to be easy to use, because you know what? Nobody has time for a lot of training anymore. All right, you step back and you look at it and you try to figure out how much people want to spend time to learn something. The answer is they want to spend 5 minutes learning something and be able to use it forever. Okay, now the reality is somewhere between there. Okay, so it comes down to a scenario where the easy use becomes important, because if the product's relatively intuitive, it's much easier to implement. So that's part of the general functionality. Hey, can I navigate the menus without too much trouble? Do I understand how to do the queries within the system? Can I enter a transaction fairly easily? Becomes important. Again, query information with the system. It's great to have information. It's only good if you can use it. So the idea of it is making sure that you have that query piece and the dashboards piece for the key performance indicators in real time. Those pieces become important because that's part of the general functionality of the system. That should cross all areas of the functionality. So if you use it for financial, for financial pieces like general ledger, you should be able to use it for accounts receivable, for reporting, querying down in the depth within the system. Okay, keep in mind, these key performance indicators and queries many times aren't strictly just a query. They become an actual tool within the system, because not only are they a report but of some sort, but they're actually a working menu, meaning that, hey, here are the new invoices that come in I need to send out. You'll have it on your dashboard to say, here are the 4 invoices that need to go out, and then you can actually work with those invoices to get them out the door if you want, for example. Can you drill down? Okay, can you actually see from the financial report all the way back to the original transaction? Okay, you should be able to see that virtually in any system in today's world. If you can't easily drill back from the end result and then get back to where the detail came from to do the analysis and things like that you might need to do over time, I probably wouldn't consider that system. It becomes critical over time, and it saves a tremendous amount of time. And it should be built in, and it should be definable. It could be changed, because suppose you use a field a certain way. Well, it could be a scenario where I can actually define where I want to drill back to. Okay, those become important. Automation. Can I automatically send out my emails at the end of the day for billing without having to have somebody trigger it? Or maybe I want to control it. There could be reasons why both ways. Maybe I need to review for accuracy or something like that, depending on my industry and what I'm doing. But the idea of it is, I want to be able to have that automated if I want. Or, hey, the CFO wants to see the final income statement on the 10th day of the month. You can easily set that up to be sent out to whoever needs to see it. Okay, or maybe you want to send out from reports the remit to advice. So if you do an EFT payment, that you can tell the vendors, hey, here's what I'm paying you. Here are the invoices I'm trying to include in this particular payment that I sent by electronic transfer to your account. So those are the ideas of how we have it work. At this point, we're also starting to see artificial intelligence starting to be built in. And how's it being used? It's being used in several different ways. In particular, you're starting to see it used kind of in help facilities to try to make it easier and quicker to find out what you have going on within the system. If I need some kind of assistance, when I click the little help key or do a search within the system, does it come up with something that means something that I can understand related to what I searched on? So the AI is being used a lot there. The other place we're starting to see AI used is in the automation processes. We're starting to see where systems can start to figure out for you, hey, this is more efficient if we do it this way, or they make it easy to set up to use that way. Secondarily, the artificial intelligence is starting to be used for document recognition. So for example, can the system take a copy of an invoice from paper or from a PDF, and in particular a PDF or similar document, and then interpret it to pull out the key information to determine, okay, who the vendor is, what's the date of the document, what's being paid, etc. And then does it create then, recognize those pieces of information from the document and then actually create the voucher for you in the system. That's where AI is starting to be coming out into the system. We're starting to see that quite frequently now. And in particular, with the products we carry, we don't see that on the GP side. We're seeing that on the Acumatica side. Okay, so it's important. Ease of integration throughout the system. Okay, it shouldn't be anymore where you can, have to go out to some other third-party product to buy a product to do decent integration into the system or get down into reading tables directly. In today's world, the integration should be much more intuitive, and there may even be different levels of it for different purposes. Last but not least, can it handle email and email automation? And I think this should be part of the general functionality, because I've seen a lot of times where two things. I think the system needs to store the emails, because if any email system gets changed, or in some cases, say it uses Outlook for your email. The problem is if I email it out of the system, for example, the invoices, it's using my email account and it shows up in my sent box. But it may not show up in the system so anybody else knows the email was sent out or what the email was that was sent out. So the key to it is that information should be stored within the system so it's there for historical purposes for anybody to use. And then on top of it, it doesn't even matter if you change email systems. Right, so the history doesn't disappear if you change from, using, Exchange somewhere internal to either using Office 365 Exchange or basically going back and using, Google Mail or something like that. So the answer is if it's inside the system, it doesn't matter which system you use. Now, you might have to reconnect the setup so you can say, oh yeah, this is our new email server, so the system has a way to do email. But other than that, you don't have to worry about the actual seeing the history of that. That should all be part of the general functionality. And believe it or not, that part is not in all systems in today's world. Okay, so I'm just going to show a couple things here. Ease of use is kind of important. I kind of like this particular nucleus research window. And you notice here, Acumatica came out highest as far as usability. And I'm sure many of you can see the products you're actually using and some kind of competitive products you might be looking at. But the key to it is determining, okay, where does it fit in what I'm looking at? So the idea is making sure the product's in the upper right-hand quadrant. So it's on a leaderboard, okay, and basically expert. And what that means between the two of those, it means that if they're at the top of that usability, it means it's going to be easier to use. I know it sounds simple and obvious, but it's not to everybody. And then the last part is, okay, how much functionality does the system basically have? Okay, and that's where you find out kind of the other piece of that. So kind of being in the leaderboard and ease of use, what does it require as far as the type of people you need to use it, those kind of things. The higher up on that in the upper right-hand quadrant, the easier it's going to be used and the more functionality you're going to have. Okay, so those are important pieces. So in looking at that, one of the things you need to look at is the ERP system I'm looking at one of the functionality leaders? This will help to ensure that your company is using the most cost-effective solution in some ways. And the reason being is if you pick a system that's not known for its functionality or depth of functionality, you could ending up needing to basically have it programmed, or tailored specifically for you, or it could have a third-party product or a customization requirement. Right, so the more functionality comes out of the product, the more easily done it will be, more cost-effective. Okay. Secondarily, if we go through and we say, are they recognized in the ERP software industry? That doesn't seem important when you're picking a product, but the important part of that is that, hey, that means that product will be around in the future. And that kind of ties in with the number of install bases that we have. Okay, if they only have 3 installations, you're partially the beta. Okay, and in our experience, you need to get up to around 1,000 implementations of the product before you're kind of past that beta mode. Okay, meaning that enough of the problems are solved by other people before you get to it. And so those become important factors. The other part is if they decide to sell out or shut down or change, somebody will be interested in purchasing it. So it's continually supported. So, the functionality aspect of that is it helps with that piece. So the idea of it is you don't want to be the testing of their functionality. You want to be able to just use their functionality. That is not to say you will never run into an issue with the software. It just means your likelihood is less of having a problem. Okay, is the software real and released? In the old days, we used to call this vaporware. And somebody would be talking and talking and talking and tell you how great their software is. But when you say, hey, can you show me? They would say, oh, sure, next week. And ultimately, they didn't have anything to show because it was literally not developed yet or not completely developed yet. Those are important factors to make sure those pieces are developed, not just to say, hey, we have manufacturing, but to actually be able to show you have manufacturing. And that relates to the depth of the functionality. So do you have a manufacturing module, but it is really simple and can only be used in very restricted organizations where they have really simple requirements? Or hey, is it a full-fledged manufacturing module and can you do a lot with it? Or accounts payable, does it do basic AP or does it do a lot more than that? Those are the important factors. What is the depth of the functionality? The more depth you have up front, you may not even use it all, but the key to it is it means you have more longevity with the system as you grow into the system or your requirements change. Okay, and then Are the functional areas when the product truly integrated? This sounds like a minor detail, but hey, does manufacturing actually integrate with inventory? Is it seamless? From the end user, does everything operate the same? Do all the menus work the same way and all the windows work the same way? Those are minor details, but extremely important. So for example, I'm going to use Acumatica as an example in this case, where they have a manufacturing module and a project module. There's a lot of industries that actually need both of those. I came from, in the real world, I used to be a controller at a company where we did structural steel for buildings. So like, for example, office parks, retail, those types of things. So we'd actually provide the steel, and basically from there, they would erect it in the field. So we had two parts to our business. We had the manufacturing side, where we basically formed the steel into what we need it to be. We cut the beams a certain way, put the drill holes in a certain way so it could be bolted up on the field. That was the manufacturing side. Then when we put it out in the field, hey, it was construction. We had AIA billing, American Institute of Architects billing, for percentage of completion method for billing and all those kind of things, and tracking of the project. Well, with Acumatica, it does that. We can actually produce manufacturing pieces to a specific project, and et cetera, and then do the construction side. Those are kind of important pieces. I've seen systems where they say, hey, we have CRM, and they put themselves all under one name, and it sounds like they have CRM, but then you discover there's no actual integration between CRM and the ERP product, for example. The key to that is making sure those pieces actually exist and they are actually integrated. It sounds minor, but can be really important. It's particularly important if you can see where they're buying out different products and incorporating them in. Okay. Acumatica is kind of delivered on those pieces. I'm not trying to make it real salesy, but the idea of it is they have those pieces already done. All right, and they're not vaporware, so it's all there, which is kind of important. And then I'm just going to mention here reviews, where do they fall in kind of the list. And you take a look at how people feel about their product. Those become important pieces too. Are the end users happy with the product and the company they're working with? That's the other part that becomes important, because what that signifies, if that means they're working with you, okay, to solve the problems and make sure everybody's happy. All right. You notice up here you have Oracle ERP right there at the top, but they're also about 10 times more expensive or more than Acumatica. Okay. So it's actually kind of a nice thing that they're up there. All right. So we're going to kind of click through, and we're going to just kind of summarize. Hopefully you kind of got something out of this, but the answer comes back to we're approaching the functionality from the desired results. That's one of the keys. Where do we want to get to, and what do we need to get there? We need to make sure we can get to the result. Make sure you review systems that have a depth of functionality. Don't review a system that only has part of what you need, or don't review a system that basically doesn't have some pieces you might need in the future. Those become important because these systems typically end up being in use for a long period of time. Ease of use. Okay, it can have great functionality, but if people can't use it reliably and accurately, it becomes really hard really quick. Ease of use gets you back up, onto the system quickly, as well as on the long term, what happens. All right. Plan for the future. Don't only look strictly at today's functionality, which is important, but think about things what you might do 5 years out, 2 years out, et cetera, as far as you can, to make sure that the system has something available for that. Doesn't mean it has everything or everything perfect. The answer is make sure it has something out there. Is the system flexible? Can the system do things in different ways? Can it cut checks multiple ways, multiple selection criteria, et cetera? Whatever it happens to be, make sure the system is flexible, and that'll help you meet your future requirements more easily as well. And then last but not least, how easily can the system be tailored to your requirements? Hey, I need to adjust the invoice format, or I need to change this process, or I need to automate that process or control that process. Whatever it happens to be, make sure the system has a flexibility for it. Okay, so I hope everybody's kind of learned something from this. I'm just going to look real quick to see if there's any questions on this. And if not, we'll wrap up the presentation. Okay, thank you. I hope everybody has a great day, and take care now.